having a sort of more expansive definition of what not just families and kids deserve, but everybody deserves. But if you're just talking about families, I think having these sort of basic baseline expectations of what everybody should have access to.
We're living in a time of great uncertainty and complexity, which acutely affects families, especially those with young children. Jessica Grose of the New York Times is one of the most incisive commentators on these issues working today. She is my guest today. I'm Joe Waters, and this is Per Capita. Jessica Grose, the New York Times, welcome to Per Capita.
Thanks so much for having me.
So a perspective we've been toying with is that much of the debate around families and family policy, not only here in the United States, but across the Western world, comes down to a fundamental question. Who are we? Are we independent, self-interested individuals, or are we inherently dependent and relational? And we're interested in how this perspective or these perspectives might shape our conclusions on issues like childcare, Social Security, or elder care. For instance, if we see ourselves as primarily dependent on others, it might lead to a different set of policies than considering ourselves as solitary and utility-driven primarily. And some view us primarily as individuals with rights and freedoms bound only by personal preferences, but many Americans place great value on belonging to a community and fulfilling the responsibilities that come with that, even if they aren't chosen. So how do these different views of identity and human nature impact how we approach specific policies and, frankly, our role as parents broadly?
It's a great and thorny question. I would say, just thinking about it in real time, that I don't think it is zero sum between those two poles. I think most people, at least in the United States, want some middle ground in between complete independence and full personal choice and a desire to be enmeshed with family and community while still having some ability to speak freely, to act freely. I think in terms of how we frame policy, I don't think at this point anyone is 100% individualistic because, we still live in a society. But I do think that there is a real tension between how much we expect people to find community and financial and practical support by themselves versus how much we expect the state to provide. So some conservatives would say, well, people should find support through churches, through their own families. This is not something that the government should provide. And I think more liberals say the government should be in the role of providing more of this connective tissue. And so I think it's less necessarily about the individualistic versus the dependent worldview. I think most of the people who are interested in this as a policy issue and most of the people living through it as a policy issue see us all as somewhat dependent. But I think who should be responsible for fomenting those feelings of connection or providing the connection when no one else will and support, I think that's where the big split lies.
Interesting. So whether you're on the more liberal side of that or the more conservative, the more Republican, more Democratic side of that, you're a keen observer of trends facing families broadly. What do you think are the most significant risks to family stability and flourishing, not only right now, but maybe in the next 5 to 10 years?
Cost really is so hard for people. Fundamentally, I would say the cost of housing. I think having a stable living situation with enough room for your family and to feel confident that you can grow your family, I think that is the biggest issue right now. But sort of secondary to that is probably healthcare. I've heard the American workplace's original sin described as, that our healthcare is attached to having a steady job. And for families, I think that can be really, really challenging because the United States is so individualistic. I think everyone accepts that I'm going to have to sort of pay for myself and do a lot of things on my own to be able to afford a family. But knowing that if you lose your full-time employment or you would prefer to have a more flexible arrangement, there's such a limiting of choice when you know that your health insurance is attached to your job.
And do you forecast that those things will be fixed in the near term?
I don't have a crystal ball. It's not looking good, though.
Right.
I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about it, which is the first step. Certainly there's a lot of awareness that housing is an issue, but I think inflation has made this challenging. I think tariffs and the cost of construction has gone up. I mean, these are facts. And so I don't see in the, immediate horizon anything shifting on this, but, I take a long view, and I'm hopeful that more people are talking about lifting onerous burdens on sort of regulations that are preventing more housing from being built. I think that there are sort of baby steps in the right direction, but it doesn't look good in the very near term.
Right. So, you referenced age at first child, for example, and, one of the sort of great transformations that we're experiencing right now is more people are delaying childbearing. They're having fewer kids than they would ultimately like to have. The birth rate is declining. At the same time, the aging of the baby boomers, which, life expectancy is longer than it's ever been. But how do you think these demographic changes, I should say, are going to impact women in particular and motherhood over the next, say, 5 to 15 years?
I do think one of the sort of under-discussed challenges of caregiving right now is being part of the sandwich generation. So that's the somewhat wonky term for people who are caring for small children while also caring for elderly family members. And the later your parents had you and the later you have kids, the more you are likely to be having, kids under 5 in the house while also having to care for older family members. And, decades of research show that women are more likely to be caregivers for older family members. So I think that is really squeezing people who are in their 30s and 40s. And again, it isn't just women. Men also feel this squeeze. Everyone is, everybody has parents, right? And
right.
Somebody has to be there to drive someone to their doctor's appointments. It's very, very unusual that people, even, upper income people, have the money to outsource all of that care. And so I think that may be lingering over some people's decision making not to become parents in the first place. But, this is very hard to track with sort of surveys and polls, but I mean, I've anecdotally heard lots of people say, well, we would have had a third kid, but these caregiving responsibilities were just too much, or we would have had a second kid. So I think it's more like you're seeing decisions made on the margins of, weighing that additional child and just being like, what, I simply don't have the time or the bandwidth in my sort of caregiving day to add that additional responsibility. One of the big reasons is marriage started to be seen, and this is like a 30 to 40-year-old trend, rather than the beginning of your life and you could be poor together and sort of figure it out. Now it's sort of seen more as a capstone. So it's, I'm already stable, I'm financially stable, and I'm going to get married now because I'm in a place to get married. I'm in a place to provide. And I think both men and women feel that way. As you need more education and you need more time accrued in the workforce to feel that sense of real stability in order to have children, the age is just going to get pushed later and later. So again, going back to sort of the cost of housing, the cost of insurance, the cost of childcare, which we haven't even touched on, and that there's no paid leave, it just makes it a really tough math equation for pretty much anybody to figure out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is like where do you start, right? So you said cost of childcare, cost of housing, cost of healthcare, sense of emotional readiness. That's probably not something that policy is going to be able to solve.
Absolutely
But there's
not.
some things there that policy can work on.
Right.
But it seems like, I mean, it's almost a mini polycrisis in the polycrisis, right?
Yeah.
Of a bunch of costs are way out of control for people who probably want to start families, who could start families. They're, it's all sort of happening when you're at the same age. Plus, you've got the issues of aging adults that you are sometimes caring for. And I will say my family is in exactly that situation. We have a 20-month-old, a 4.5-year-old, and of my father-in-law, we moved into assisted living last summer, right?
Yep.
And so where do you start? Like if you're advising President Trump, where do you start on these things?
Well, I would start with paid leave, honestly, because infant care is so expensive. And if we could give all American women 6 solid months, and he, to his credit, gave federal workers paid leave in his first administration. He does not seem interested in the topic anymore. Maybe someone could get him interested in the topic of providing tax benefits to companies that give workers paid leave. I mean, especially hourly workers who are very unlikely to get any leave at all. Just giving that 6-month buffer to a lot of families. And obviously, I would like to see it be just parental leave, but I don't think that the administration would offer that. Knowing what I know about them. So I would say give mothers at least that 6 months, if only to, obviously there's adoptive parents and new parents aren't always the ones bearing the children, but it is the most common situation that women are bearing the children. And not only do they not have time to physically recover themselves, they are also having to go back to work and pay for incredibly costly infant care. So I think that
which, if it's even available, right? If
right.
infant care is even available.
Exactly. I mean, the shortages are eternal. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago about how there was a Cosmo cover line in 1984 or 1986 that said the child care crisis. So it's never been enough for every working mother in the United States. There's never been enough. So, it goes in, it gets slightly better and then slightly worse, but it's just never been sort of adequate to the number of people who need it. And so I think that as a policy matter, I think you could get that seems the most pragmatic and realistic in terms of what I think could pass. I mean, even getting to 3 months would be amazing because we don't have that for a lot of people.
And one thing I think is interesting about this, right, is that, in the first term, President Trump extended paid leave it was to federal workers, yes. Right? And certainly lots of businesses provide paid leave yes. to their workforce. My sense is that is almost exclusively extended to sort of higher income, not necessarily high income, but higher income knowledge workers, the college educated workforce. And that even if companies that have paid leave for their sort of office workers, they may not have also the same leave to their, say, frontline wage sort of hourly workers who work in retail or whatever. So it also seems to me like there's this massive class divide, right? Which
absolutely.
It seems like we're and where I'm going with that is like it seems just really clear that we devalue. It's a way in which we devalue not only the work of sort of hourly wage working women in this case, but we devalue their childbearing.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's really even hard to quantify the stress that lower income parents probably feel as they are having children, and the stress of having to make ends meet and worry about any time that they're taking off, watching that bank account, go into negative numbers just because you've made the wonderful choice to have a child. And I mean, it's not just for those individuals, it's for the future health of the entire country. So I really feel like it's such a civic mistake to not invest in that early motherhood period. And I also think there's other ways in which we don't value care. Something that, again, I think has bipartisan support is the idea of mothers getting some sort of Social Security benefit for the time they are spending at home caring for their kids, and fathers as well. So anyone who is taking time out of the workforce to provide caregiving, that should accrue to their retirement. And we don't do that either. And I think that would be, again, it's not a silver bullet. Is it a small policy tweak that seems possible? Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually wrote a paper. I don't know if you saw it, but Elliot Haspel and Ivana Greco wrote a paper on that this summer, and certainly I think they would be in agreement that is an incremental, small policy tweak. And I'm of the view that we should not underestimate the degree to which those small policy tweaks can make life a little bit better, right?
Absolutely.
And it's the type of thing that government can do really, really well, because, it's easy to complain about bureaucratic incompetence. The Social Security system for 90 years has been a marvelous system, which we've tweaked many times, and it's still, despite what's over the horizon in the 2030s, but it lifts millions of people out of poverty every month, right? And that's a little tweak that can, down the line when you are drawing Social Security, could significantly help.
And it's just like, I'm always like, yes, and. I
Right.
mean, it's better than not doing it. So let's try, if you care about these issues, I think you can sort of push on several different levers, and sort of claiming any tweak that could be helpful is not worth it is, I don't know. I think it's just sort of short-sighted. Mm-hmm. I have a sort of more expansive view on possibility.
Yeah. And I want to get your view on this, because things don't seem very good, right, in terms of our ability to even talk with one another across the aisle, much less to advance a big package on, say, paid leave, right? But this is just like, when it comes to what families need, it doesn't seem likely that government as it is working today is going to be able to deliver, certainly in the next 2 years, but probably not even in the next 10, from what I'm feeling.
Yeah, I can't honestly tell you that I feel particularly optimistic in this moment, but things can change really quickly. There have been a lot of state level changes. Obviously, the United States is unique in our federalist system, and that each state has a lot of power to improve people's lives. And again, anecdotally, I have heard from families who live in states or cities that have passed paid leave who said, like I was saying before, they made the choice in the other direction. They were like, oh, we can have that second kid now because we have this little bit of cushion. And so it's frustrating because I see the polling on so many of these things, and they have bipartisan support. Mm-hmm. So much smarter people than I am weigh in on the sort of endless gridlock. And there's so much everybody disagrees on. But I think a lot about how the biggest divisions are between the most polarized 10% of each side. And right. Those just happen to be the people who are the loudest in social media, and they happen to have a lot of power right now. And I just don't think they are representative of most people. They're not even representative of most pundits. And that's actually part of why I've, in the past year, left both X and Blue Sky. Because I just stopped feeling like participating in discourse on either of those sites felt productive or interesting or good. And I'm really lucky and privileged to have a huge platform where I can fully express my ideas in, 1,000 to 1,500 words. And if you want to know what I think, it's there. back 10 years ago on Twitter, I would learn a ton and I would hear points of view that I didn't agree with, but at least I could say, I respect that argument and you're laying it out in a way that I didn't think about it that way before. I can't. That has not happened to me in a long time.
So I mean, as a journalist who I would imagine endeavors to have a pulse on what's happening across the country, if you're not doing it that way, and we know, of course, that our cable news ecosystem is also highly polarized.
Yeah.
Like, where do you find the best learning is happening for you as a journalist and a commentator?
So I still am on Threads, and I use it as I don't post that much, but I use it as an RSS feed. So I'm getting a lot of articles there that I wouldn't see otherwise. I subscribe to a ton of newsletters, so many newsletters, Peak newsletter. A lot of them aggregate other articles on my beat, so it's like I'm seeing a ride, and that's where I see a lot of opposing views, which again I don't always agree with, but at least it's like, okay, I need to understand what people who don't agree with me are talking about.
Sure.
I look at Reddit. So it's not like I've quit all social media.
Right.
It's just those short form text based social medias that I find the discourse there has just gotten so bonkers and exhausting that I'm just like, I don't need this in my life. And then you just see things, I read all the time. I'm constantly reading. I'm reading books. I'm reading journal articles. I never, ever stop reading every day. But it will never be complete. And I have my own, I try really hard to get out of my, New York City bubble and understand issues from the perspective of people living really different lives with really different challenges. And I think about this a lot actually in terms of, I cover tech in schools a lot. And it's been so important and valuable for me to talk to K through 12 teachers, but also college instructors at all different kinds of institutions: public, private, charter, rural, urban, suburban, community colleges, elite colleges, all of it, because their experience and the populations they serve are wildly different and have different needs. And it is so, so important that I remember that when I'm writing. And it is challenging sometimes when you're reporting at a national level, because we are such a big and diverse country. So it's sort of even more valuable when I do find those points of really broad agreement and support. Because it's like, I can talk to this person in rural Arizona and they have the same view of this as someone who lives in Milwaukee. And then that, I think, makes the inputs even stronger.
So, Jess, you had what I thought was an incisive column about women's workforce participation. And as you reported, since January 2024, women's employment rates are down about 2% from where men's are. So what story do you think those data are telling us?
So there's not an obvious reason why that's happening. And that almost makes it scarier. There's a number of factors. One is, federal money has stopped flowing to a number of areas, including education, and education is a predominantly female field. Part of it, some economists suspect, is the administration's railing against diversity and inclusion. And so sort of this chilling effect that the vibe is, if you are not a white man and you have a good job, and a good job meaning a job where there is opportunity for advancement that is paid well, if you are a non-white man in one of those roles, you are not there because you deserve to be there. You are there because of DEI. And I think that messaging, whether enforced as they are trying to, say it's illegal, I think that has a real chilling effect on promotion, on hiring. I also think the cost of childcare, which has outpaced inflation for other goods and services. I was shocked at how much. Apparently, It has gone up nearly 30% in the past 5 years, which is insane because it was already quite expensive and out of reach for a lot of families. And so, the dynamic is often if you are in a two-parent family and statistically speaking, the wife earns less money. It makes sense financially in the short term for the wife to leave the workforce, even if that is not her preferred decision or choice or what would be better for her, the family in the long term, because lots of data shows that if you leave the workforce for I want to say more than 6 months. I don't have the data in front of me. It has impacts on your lifetime salary. It has huge impacts on how much you earn the job that you take when you come back to the workforce, which isn't to say that, no one should ever leave the workforce and everybody just needs to be a wage slave for the rest of their life. But that this is disproportionately borne by women is unfair, and it's scary, and it leaves them in a position of financial vulnerability should things not turn out the way that they planned or hoped. So the scarier thing is that all of the federal bureaus and statistical analysis that is supposed to take place is kind of being erased. So the Women's Bureau, which is part of the Department of Labor, is there by...
Which, by the way, dates to 1920. This is
exactly.
not a Biden administration thing. This is much older than that.
But it is supposed to support women working and collects lots of data and statistics on women working. It is there by law, and so the administration can't get rid of it, but they can defund it, which is what they did for the budget for 2026. So, they are basically erasing any departments that might help women who are in particular fields. And, the military is another example in which the achievements and existence of women in leadership are just being literally erased. So, it's not great. I don't like it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you may know this has been a major area of work for Elliot Haspel and Ivana Greco on our team for the last year and a half. And in fact, we have another survey going out, national survey going out here in the next few days. And, our research thus far has showed that many stay-at-home parents are struggling economically.
Yeah.
They come from very diverse backgrounds. They're sort of evenly split across the political spectrum. They're often working part-time jobs, right? I mean, I've been in rooms where we've been interviewing stay-at-home parents and heard stories of somebody who's taking care of the kids during the work day or the school day, young kids, and so they sort of meet the definition of being a stay-at-home parent, but then they're going and they're working third shift, right? Yeah. When they sleep, I don't know. But there seems to be this tension, right, which I think your column gets at, between the goal of sort of full economic empowerment for women, right? And you sort of describe this erasure of women that is happening in the workforce in particular, and then also supporting the choices that families want to make. And I mean, one of the things which not only our research has shown, but a significant number, 1 in 5 of the stay-at-home parents in the country, they're stay-at-home dads. And again, we've heard them tell us that's a choice that I wanted to make as a dad because my wife makes more than I make, and we wanted somebody to stay at home when our kids were young. So I'm just curious, what principles do you think should guide our thinking, our decision-making around how best to both support family choices and to support the goals that we have or we might have around sort of full women's economic empowerment, in particular participation in the labor force?
I think it is always going to be incredibly complicated, and I really don't ever want anyone to feel less than or shamed for the individual choices that they're making, or say that it's, something wrong with you if you prefer to be home with your kids than working. In fact, one of the great blessings of my life to be able to be freelance when my older daughter was born, and for the first 3 years of her life. So, I worked a 30-hour week. And so I am so privileged to have gotten to do that. I see that as a great privilege. And so at the upper levels, we have what Claudia Golden calls greedy work. So for college educated knowledge workers, the hours spent at the office and the commitments in off hours have just exploded over the past 50 years, right? There is no more 9 to 5. Nobody works 9 to 5. That doesn't exist. And it makes caregiving impossible. And then at the lower levels, you just can't make ends meet on one salary. It's just not, you can't do it anymore. We've constructed a system in which you just can't win. And so to allow for women's full economic empowerment, I think that there's a lot of protection that can happen that isn't happening. I mean, in terms of prenups even, it's like discussions that you're having when you are deciding to get married about like, if this goes wrong, and and obviously lots of kids are born to parents who are not married, a lot of kids are born to single moms, so now we're just talking about people who can stay home. Unfortunately, the only tools we have right now are individual tools. So how we think about it is, number one, there's a bunch of structural things that need to change. And as we previously discussed, none of them are changing anytime soon. So then on the individual level, if I had a friend who was like, just had a kid, I want to leave the workforce, I would say, get a post-nup. I would say protect yourself. And I would say that to a man or a woman, because I don't know the laws in every state, but often the spouse that has been out of the workforce for a long period of time is not well served when things go wrong. Or have a discussion about what happens if the unimaginable happens and the other spouse dies. I mean, on an individual level, think about all potential outcomes, and on a societal level, we just need so much more structural support that our peer nations have and take for granted in terms of healthcare not being attached to a full-time employment, in terms of, childcare, in terms of, which is subsidized heavily in lots of places, in terms of paid leave, all the things. We don't have any of those things. And so, unfortunately, we are left with individual choices to solve systemic problems.
Yeah. And just on that, because, it's something we do talk about, because, let's say you take in the Nordic countries, for example, family policy used to be described as population policy, and it hasn't done anything against, to improve the birth rate, right?
Yeah.
And so you could say, like, if that's, looking back at sort of the original intentions of the policy and sort of measuring where we are today against the original intentions of the policy, it's been a failure, right? And
yeah,
so
that's why I don't like framing these as birth rate policies.
Okay.
You can't coerce. There's no way policy will make people have more babies,
right,
as we've seen in Hungary. Hungary, which is not what I would describe as a liberal country, they have thrown money at this problem, and it has barely moved the needle. And so I just don't think that social policy will change this because birth control exists. I mean, that's like, once birth control came in, most women don't want to have more than 3 kids. Most people don't want 7 kids.
Yeah.
And so it was absolutely inevitable that birth rates would fall pretty far.
Right.
We didn't, because at no time in the history of humanity has there been reliable birth control. But I think the way to think about these policies is the health of the citizens. And the health of the citizens in the Nordic countries is great.
Yeah.
And the quality of life of people who don't have very much money is so much better than the quality of life for people who don't have very much money in the United States.
I can imagine, right, a certain type of sort of Republican commentator in the United States saying quality of life is not the business of the government.
Yeah, and we would disagree.
Yeah. Got it. And see, I mean, this is part of what I like. I'm interested now that we sort of, have moved on sort of beyond the original framing and the Nordic countries of population policy. In fact, are families with young children in those countries do they have a higher quality of life? Are they less stressed?
Yes.
There's certainly better health outcomes.
Yes.
Right? And are these goals, and I ask this question in part because we know the Trump administration is very interested in birth rates, or at least some factions of the Trump administration very interested in birth rates. But, should maybe as somebody who's on the more liberal side of things, are there goals that we should have, sort of aspirations that we should have for families beyond workforce participation, beyond just making it easier to participate in the economy, around quality of life that, frankly, I don't hear a lot of Democrats talking about?
The first thing is we have way too many families that are food insecure. That's, in such a country filled with abundance, it is absurd. That something like the National Diaper Bank has to exist is bananas. These are things that we should provide, that should be provided to everybody. What the mechanism is, we can argue about that, but just that sort of baseline of is there enough food to feed this family, regardless of their financial circumstances. So I think that should be an absolutely shared value. Again, access to healthcare, access to well visits. I'm actually, my column for next week is about access to recreation and green space, because that is something I think we don't talk about enough. There was just a Morning Consult poll that showed families with a household income over $100,000 a year, their kids are basically twice as likely to be playing sports. And I personally got such great benefit from being part of sports teams in my youth, and my kids I see have incredible experiences playing sports, and that would be only a luxury for the wealthy is incredibly sad to me. So, there are organizations that define it as, a safe park within a 10-minute walking distance of everybody's home. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, people so not just kids, but families and anybody, because this is what public parks do, they are 2/3 more likely to have spoken to a stranger if they are regular attendees of public park. And so it's one of the last spaces where you're talking to people who are different from you. So I think having a sort of more expansive definition of what not just families and kids deserve, but everybody deserves. But if you're just sort of we don't want to make it like the everything bagel, right? If you're just talking about families, I think having these sort of basic baseline expectations of what everybody should have access to.
You mentioned Milwaukee already, and I know a bit about Milwaukee because my wife grew up on the south side of Milwaukee. There was a tradition very much rooted in sort of the German strong union tradition in Wisconsin, where, call it the Wisconsin way, call it sewer socialism in Milwaukee, but where sort of recreation, right, was understood to be an essential part of living the good life. And even if you were a relatively low-income immigrant working in a factory in a place like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the right to recreation, right, the right to a park was yours, right? And it wasn't just for the privileged. And to this day, you still have Milwaukee County public parks along the lakefront, beautiful, Lake Michigan shoreline in the summer, where there are public beer gardens, right? Now you have to pay for the beer, but there's a playground, there's a park, and there's a beer garden, and that really it's this marvelous, I think truly lowercase d democratic thing of this is everybody's lake. This is everybody's community, and there's something for in proud Wisconsin tradition. There's something for the adults, which is beer, and there's something for the kids as well, and we can all gather here as a community. And I think that is as Eric Kleinenberg and others have well documented, this is sorely missing.
Yes.
And very much a part of what it means to live a flourishing life, beginning
Absolutely.
in childhood.
We live near part of what actually kept us in Brooklyn. I mean, there was a moment when we had our second kid where I was like, ooh, do we really want to stay here? But there are so many walkable parks just in every direction. And I'm so glad that we did stick it out. I feel lucky to live in a part of the city where all that's available and accessible. But if I drove, 5 miles deeper into Brooklyn, it's a big borough, I don't think you would find that. I don't think you would find a park where people feel safe to have their kids play by themselves when they are 10 and 11, And so I think everybody deserves that availability, and it is part of flourishing. I completely agree.
So just one thing that really interests me is that we spend more time parenting today than ever before, and even my use of the word parenting is a novelty, right? Indicates how we view this activity now. I'm spending more time with my son and daughter, taking care of my son and daughter, than my grandparents would have spent with my parents. Yet Americans have a lot of nostalgia for previous expressions of parenthood, I think, from 60, 70 years ago, when we were far more hands-off. What do you think about that? And I think there's a lot of nostalgia for people's own childhood and their own experience with childhood. I'm more interested in the nostalgia that maybe we have or don't have around parenthood.
Well, I would say be the change that you want to see in the world. So I think the nostalgia is real, but what I would say is that you can make some of that change. But I also think a lot of it is positive. I think a lot of people who would have described themselves as sort of latchkey kids have made it their mission to be sort of more involved in their kids' lives because they felt like I didn't get enough from my parents. So it's never just one thing, right? It's not it's never all good or all bad. Well, there's good things and there's bad things. And I do think some of the nostalgia is imagining a past that never actually existed. So I see a lot of this in the sort of traditional gender roles discourse. Women have always worked. They've always worked.
Right.
Especially working class women. They have definitely always worked. So the sort of, man goes to work, woman stays home, sort of 1950s ideal wasn't even true in the 50s for most families.
Right.
So I think some of the nostalgia is for, and I'm stealing this book title from Stephanie Kuntz, who's a great historian. She has a book called The Way We Never Were. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the nostalgia is real. Some of it is imagined. Some of it we can change in our lives if we want to bring back some aspects of our own childhood to our children's lives. And some of it is good. Some of our involvement in the kids' lives is all for the good.
And I would say it's also seems to me to be a little bit of a reflection, sort of where we are now, a little bit of a reflection of the way we work, at least the way some of us work. I mean, I'm at work, you're at work, I'm sitting here in my house with a daughter napping downstairs. I'm the only caregiver in the house at the moment. That would not be possible even 5-6 years ago before
Absolutely.
COVID for a lot of people. But now it is possible. Am I parenting right now or am I working right now? Well, I'm doing both.
Yep.
So, I just thinking of my own situation. I'm a parent of a boy and a girl. And in your piece about the erasure of women, you pointed out the increasing talk about men and boys, and there's this sense maybe growing in the country in some quarters that there is a crisis for men and boys. Do you think we're right to be worried about this? What's the advice you'd give me as a parent of a boy?
I would say I don't think that boys and men are doing worse than girls and women. I would say they have unique challenges. I absolutely think that boys and men might have different challenges than girls and women and that we should be sensitive to that. But I don't think that the narrative that boys and men are in some acute crisis really holds water for me. I mean, there's so many statistics that I feel like are warped to paint that image. One I've been hearing talked about a lot recently is the suicide rate among men. Well, this is a historic thing. As long as they have kept statistics about suicide, men have completed suicide more than women. And it's called the gender paradox in suicide because more women attempt it. More women have always attempted it, and more men just complete it because they use more deadly methods. So I don't think that suggests that either men or women are doing well. Right. I would say that there are people of all genders who are really, really struggling. To reach those people, you might need different methods to reach the girls and the boys. That I agree with. And I think that there's, attempts to provide those different resources completely makes sense to me. But I just have found, and that's just one example of the way I think that the statistics are.
So you'd say there's not necessarily a men and boys crisis, but there is a difference between the needs that men and boys have and the needs of women and girls, and we should meet those differences appropriately.
Yes, but also not always. Sometimes it's the same problem, But I think that there are approaches that might work better for boys and then might work better for girls. So, if we're talking about, mental health specifically, boys and men tend to express mental health issues through anger much more than girls and women do. So if you're a parent and you're, worried about whether your kid is really not doing well and you're not seeing it, knowing that the sort of expression of discontent might look different for boys and girls. But again, it's like, your kid best, right? But this is just sort of a known among people who deal with adolescent mental health, is that teenage boys will often express depression through anger and girls internalize it more. And so they'll, they're just how it manifests is going to look different. And so being aware of those things. But again, I think if you look at the statistics and mental health, there is a population of girls and there's a population of boys who are not doing well. The problem with calling anything a crisis, and this is the problem with headline writers, is at some point it loses its teeth. Because when we call everything a crisis, it's there's a lot of problems in the world that are really urgent and upsetting and that we want to deal with. And if you call them all a crisis, then people will become inured to all of them. And right. So I would put it exactly how I just put it. There are some girls who are doing really poorly and there's some boys who are doing really poorly, I think more so than before COVID. And that is something that we need to address, and the strategies might look different for boys than for girls.
Great. Jess, any predictions on what the typical American family will look like in 25 years, 2050?
Oh,
what will be
goodness. Typical? That is such a good question. I don't know that it's going to look a lot different than it does now. I think we might see more multi-generational living if the sort of housing crisis there. See, it's so easy to just use it. Yep. Housing issues don't resolve, which hopefully they will somewhat by then. Marriage rates look pretty stable. The divorce rate has actually dropped. So again, it's plus minus. Fewer people get married, which I think one might argue is bad, but fewer people are getting divorced because fewer people are making bad marriages. So that's good. And so I feel like the sort of earthquake of change that we've had in the past 40 years feels like it's stabilized a little bit. And I pulled this up for something else today. The percentage of high school seniors who say they will never get married has remained the same from 1975 till today. It's around 5%. So I think people still, by and large, want the traditional vision. And the trick is hopefully helping them find it if they haven't been able to attain it. But I mean, obviously, what you want when you're 18 is pretty different than maybe what you want when you're 27.
Right. But as I always tell our team, those kids in high school are forming their ideas about the kind of families that they want, and they're going to be, a lot of them are going to be moving towards those ideas within this decade. Yeah. And so we need to be attentive to what they're saying. last question. What's one project you've dreamed about but haven't started yet?
That's a great question. I keep saying that I'm going to write a book about Americans moving away from organized religion because I've done so much reporting on that, and it's been some of the most beautiful, profound reporting that I've ever done in my entire career. Because talking to people about their relationship to their faith is just endlessly fascinating to me, because it's such a core value. And if you no longer are part of an organized religious tradition, there's very little room in secular society for you to talk about your feelings around faith. And so I've been so honored by people sharing those feelings with me. So I keep saying I'm going to write a book proposal, but writing the last book while also having a full-time job and having 2 kids truly almost killed me. And I was working 6 days a week, and I hated that. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to do that again.
I can understand.
So I keep putting it off, but I do want to do it sometime, and maybe when my kids are older.
Jessica Grose, New York Times, thanks for coming on Per Capita.
Thanks for having me.